Thank you, Mr. Meredith. Give me some other titles I will accept. If it's good, of course. You know, it's interesting because as I heard Mr. Meredith announce, a few things, when I look back, we had so many memories, really. And in fact, that's part of my sermon because of the fact what made and makes some of us stick to what we believed. And what made some of the people who are close to you, they just didn't stay. Why? What makes anyone be sure of one's belief? I ask you the question, are you really sure that what you believe is what you really practice? Is there anything in the world that could make you turn away from what you have learned from the very beginning? As Mr. Meredith mentioned, we have been together for so long, and we have seen people come and go. I've seen tremendous friends come and go. Why? They knew it, but what did make them sort of a waver or change? So my question to you is there anything in the world that could really shake your beliefs? That could make you turn away? That will make say, well, I'm not quite sure. Think about it because of the fact, you see, this wavering or of not being sure is what starts people turning away, turning around, looking for something else. The question is, what are you looking for? You'll be surprised if you ask the question, really, you are looking something that you really want to, humanly speaking, carnally speaking. Because you have given from the Bible, from the sermons, from the church, all the things you need to be convinced. But most of the time you want to convince your own human nature. And that's what's has happened to some of our people. Let me tell you something. About a short time ago, I met a man who is no longer with us. He was. So I talked to him. I said, well, what made you turn away? You know what his answer was? I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I'm still searching. I said, you're searching what? I don't know. I said, were you happy with us? Yeah. Were you happy now? I don't know. Look at the attitude. So this is what I'm talking about. If you have this type of an attitude, brethren, you're in trouble. You know what? You have to be convinced. So this man, frankly speaking, what he was looking for something that he himself would like, with which he will agree. He'll be happy with something that would perhaps satisfy his carnal ego, carnal mind. Well, brethren, that's not the way. Certainly not. You have to know one thing, brethren. If you have this type of an attitude, it's very unlikely that you will enter God's kingdom. Now, this man said, I have faith, God will guide me. I said, my friend, you don't have faith. Let me show you something. Perhaps that's where we should start the sermon, in James chapter 1. James 1 is an eye-opener for people like him or people like us because of the fact James tells us exactly what is faith and how you can please God. You heard in the sermon how to please God, but you see, look what James says about the very subject we have over here. James 1, verse 5. If any of you, he says, lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives all liberally without reproach, and will be given. Look at this, verse 5, verse 6. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. Now this man was doubting. I don't know about you. I don't know about any one of us. Do you really doubt that what you're learning here, what you're hearing here, is not the truth? Do you have any ideas as to what else you could do to find the truth? Let's continue. He says, for he who doubts is like, I like this one, a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the winds. It's a beautiful statement, you know. Think of it. Are you really just driven by the wave of the sea? Sort of wavering, as this man was, or is, I don't know. Because some of us, that's exactly where we are. We still, after all the things we hear, after all the things we have done or said or seen, we still are still wavering, like a wave of the sea. Brethren, that's my subject if you want to, but you see, the question is this: what really makes you a strong Christian? People have asked me time and again, what are the things, perhaps is the thing that you are most impressed with Mr. Armstrong? What is, all the experience Mr. Meredith had, I had, what impressed me most? I tell you, the very things I'm talking about. He was convinced of what he believed. Well, you could never shake him. You know, you would just say, wait a moment, do you know what he believed? And so there it goes. I mean, he has said time and again, if all of you left, I will finish the job. Now that's what we're talking about. And I'm sure, with all respect to my friend, Mr. Meredith, he has the same attitude. I mean, that's what it is. You cannot say he doesn't believe what he's preaching. He knows. And he wants us, as Mr. Armstrong, to make us understand, look, be sure what you believe, and then nothing should really move you anymore. Because of the fact, brethren, there's plenty in this world that will distray us, that will make us wavering like the wave of the sea. There's much. Satan is certainly there to help us in that respect. Okay, as a sermon today, I would like to ask you a question. Because it's a question that I've been asked time and again when I preach so often, let's say in the past especially with the public lectures. People say, what's your religion? Okay, how do you answer? If someone asks you, what is your religion, how would you answer? Would you say you're a Christian? No good. They are Christians too. Would you say you believe in the Bible? Well, doesn't satisfy because they too believe in the Bible their own way. You're open for argument in a way, and you haven't really been able to answer the question. So, really, what is your religion? Interesting, because James told you about the faith. Let me finish about the start of perhaps chapter 1, verse 6. It says, let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For, look at this, verse 7, for let no one suppose that he will receive anything. Look at this. You pray, you ask God whatever you have in mind, whatever you need. He says, not anyone suppose that he will receive anything from God if he's double-minded, unstable, and in all his ways. There it is. So your prayers are not answered, or you have some difficulties in life. The fact is that probably you are just wavering. And you're not really convinced. So my question is, what is your religion then? What do you want to find? In the same book, James, in the same chapter 1, James answered the question. He says, verse 26, if anyone among you thinks he is religious, that's an interesting word, religious. What does religion mean? Well, the Bible answers that question. It says, if anyone thinks that he's religious and does not, well, bridle his tongue. Now, it's strange the way he's starting the very subject. Bridle your tongue. Do you bridle your tongue? You know, do you know what to say, what not to say, how to keep things, let's say, for yourself? More damage has been done in the church by the tongues we have used but done otherwise. Because we talk too much. Time and again we say, look, read the book of Proverbs. And there is so much said in the book of Proverbs. Saying, look, think what you say. Pray before you speak. Don't say something which is not good. I'm just paraphrasing. I mean, that's the idea. So you see, true religion, that makes you really stick to the truth. What requires to bridle your tongue. Ask God daily to just help you to know what to say, what not to say, how to keep your mouth shut. And your mind too, of course, at the same time. And then he says, the tongue which deceives his own heart. And says, this one's religion is useless. Strange. That's the first proof he gives you that if you don't know how to manage your tongue, your religion is useless. That's wrong, isn't it? That's what makes people waver. And then he goes on. He says, pure religion and undefiled religion before God is, and the Father, of course, is that you visit the orphan. You know what? The ones who need you. The ones who are lonely. Orphans and the widows in their trouble, and keep oneself unspotted from the world. I won't enter into all these things, but you see, this is what pure religion is from the Bible point of view. And of course, we have to keep God's commandments. That's fine. That's part of it. You can't practice love unless you are practicing what James says over here. So, brethren, I ask you once again, if someone asks you the question, what is your religion? Would you just say, this is my religion? Is this the way you would define it? If you are convinced of it yourself, I don't think anything can make you turn away from God's truth. You know what religion means, really? I mean, etymologically, just meaning, root. It means it binds together. You cannot separate. So if you have the true religion James is speaking about here, then you cannot be separated from it. As I said time and again, I've seen so many of my friends come and go. And some of them, they don't realize that, look, you will never find what you want, humanly speaking. You will never find a perfect church. No way, because we are too carnal. You will never find, let's say, a perfect minister, far from it. Okay, we're all doing the best. But as we do the best, as you have your mind in this, convinced that, look, you are being truly religious from the Bible point of view, controlling your mind, controlling your words, obeying God, and also helping those who are in need, you are on your way to success. It's interesting because of the fact in the Old Testament, it's also, you can find definition of true religion in different ways. Let me show it to you. Micah chapter 6. He's saying here the same thing in a different way, defining in a way the true religion. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. He says, God has shown you, he says, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? There it is. What does God want me to do? What's my religion that I should have so that it will be pleasing in his eyes? So that's the sense, brethren. We have not asked that question often enough. We don't think of those things. We are so entangled in our own daily words or perhaps desires. So we are no longer convinced as we were long ago as the time of, let's say, Pasadena and the college. At least not as much as we should be today. Practically over there, that's what we hear day and night practically. We were convinced, we were determined, we're going to finish it, we're going to do the job. That was our first goal. When you lose that first goal, brethren, you are wavering. So it's high time that we all of us go back and take things seriously, because you hear from here, this pulpit here, how we are close to the end. We haven't seen the end yet, but I think we're going to be surprised, very much surprised, as to how the end is going to be tough. Look, read Matthew 24. You know, I was in Europe when we had Second World War. I was spared. I saw the sufferings. I saw some of these torturing furnaces. And some people say, well, there's no such thing as Holocaust. But then when I saw that, when I come back to Matthew chapter 24, he says that before the return of Jesus Christ, things will be such as they have never been as far as the sufferings are concerned. The worst sufferings. That was bad. Now the worst is ahead of us. So unless we have this conviction, unless we know that God is with us, He's going to help us and guide us, and He is, but unless we act that way, live that way, we may deceive ourselves, and we might let some people just make us turn away. That's what happens. People say, why? Why so-and-so left the church? Well, look, the answer is always simple. If you are not convinced, if you're not really sure, you better get down on your knees, ask God, look, God, please show me. Fast, if need be. But don't waver, because you will never, I repeat, never find the perfection you're looking for, because that does not exist on the human level. God will lead you to it if you surrender to His will. In the Old Testament, as I said, you will find the same truth. It says, Hosea chapter 6, verse 8. He says, so what does God require of you? Do justly, interesting, justly in whose eyes? In God's eyes. All of God's commandments are just. So you see, do what God says, obey Him, do justly. It's the same thing, visiting the widows, helping the orphans, bridling your tongue. That's justly. And it says, to love mercy. How many sermons have we had on this subject? Mercy is both ways. If you're going to ask God to be merciful toward you, be sure you are also merciful. Let me just make one detour here. Matthew chapter 6. You all know by heart. But mercy is conditioned. In other words, if you don't have it, don't ask God for it, because He won't give it to you. Simple. Here, Matthew chapter 6, when disciples asked Him how to pray, and among other things, He says, look, this is the way you should pray. He says, verse 12, and forgive us our debts, or be merciful to us, as we forgive our debtors, as we are merciful toward others. It's an Old Testament, New Testament. And some of us are not convinced because we have not forgiven. To some of us, forgiveness only comes once a year at the time of Passover. Even then. Brethren, we have too much of this human carnal nature in us. Too much we just, we don't forgive. We see the faults with other people. By so doing, we are wavering in our own beliefs. We look for perfection, let's say, we don't see it, and we turn somewhere else, and somewhere else you will not find it. You cannot even find in God's Bible, God's way of thinking, getting close to Him, His church, His people, that try to be a light. This man I was talking about, he said, well, I don't find the love I'm looking for. I said, my friend, why can't you be yourself a light? Why do you have to look for in someone else? Oh, well, finished. That's what makes us wavering. And then got back to Deuteronomy chapter 10, I guess, 10, again shows the same definition of true religion. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 12. God is speaking to you and to me here in the Old Testament, our forefathers says, and now he says, Israel, what does the Lord your God requires of you? Same question. What's your religion? What's true, really, definition of religion? Micah answered, here you have back in Deuteronomy, God speaking through Moses, he says, what does your God require of you? But to fear the Lord, fear means obey, respect, do his will, to walk in his ways. You know, you have heard sermons, walking with God, not only talking. And then love him, to serve the Lord with all your God, all your heart, all your soul. Do you see anything different here from what I've been saying? You know, there's no doubts here. There's no sort of saying, well, do halfway. It's all the way or nothing. That's what it says. You have to love your God with all your heart, all your mind. And there's no place for wavering. As Christ, when he combined the 10 commandments into 2 sections, he said, with all your heart, all your mind, you have to love God and your neighbor. That's what we're talking about, brethren. You know, it isn't hard. It's hard, of course, if you want the things your way. But frankly, to understand the Bible is very simple. It's the accepting it which is hard. Because sometimes the Bible will tell you to do things which you may not like. What we call justice, or humanly speaking. Look at what God says in Isaiah chapter 64. You remember, God wants us to act justly. Justly in whose eyes? In God's eyes. Because humanly speaking, our justice is nothing. Look at this. Isaiah chapter 16, verse 6. He says, but we all like unclean things. So all of our righteousness, he says, is like what? Like filthy rags. That's what we are. That's what your human mind, human justice, human ways are. That's why some people waver. That's why we are not sure. You know, there's one being, it's always there to see to it that you will fail. That's Satan. God is there to protect you, but Satan is also on the other side. God will never allow Satan to do anything to you unless you want to surrender to Satan. So don't let Satan win. Doubts will push you towards Satan. Faith will move you toward God. So you have some doubting ideas or wavering, like the wind, the sea, the waves. If that happens, come back again to the true religion. What do I believe in? Why do I shake? Because of Satan will sit with that you will really fail. And he will not succeed so long as you are close to God and keep this attitude. Humility. To me, one of the most important subjects on any sermon is humility. In Proverbs chapter 15, verse 33, it's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It says, humility, or rather, honor precedes humility. Honor precedes humility. We are all shooting for honor. God's kingdom, what greater honor can you have? Imagine, we be in God's kingdom, his children, but before you get to that point, humility should be what you need. All of us. Therefore, you always remember, humility precedes honor. All right? Let's continue with this very interesting subject because of the fact frankly speaking, if we are convinced, nothing will shake us. We won't be just wavering. I don't care what anyone will tell you or what they will tell you to convince that you're in the wrong place. If you have this type of an attitude, nothing will shake you. I get calls plenty. Why so-and-so left the church? I said, forget about so-and-so. Be sure that you know what you believe and you believe what God says and to stick to it. What helps you? You cannot help someone else if that someone else is not asking for your help, but you can help yourself if you just turn to God and ask Him to just guide you. You have to be convinced. As I said, nothing could have shaken Mr. Armstrong in his beliefs. Same thing with Mr. Meredith. He cannot say he will not change, and he's right. That's what we should be. You see, brethren, unless you have that conviction, that determination, you cannot finish the battle. It's a battle against Satan, and we will win. Let me just take one example, which you know by heart. In the Old Testament, I don't know how more convinced you can be. It's Daniel chapter 3. Now here we have a similar case. We are facing difficult days ahead of us. Here we have in Daniel chapter 3, 3 Hebrews. You know the story. I want to read everything, but I would like to show you what determination is, what conviction is. Here we have 3 courageous men God had called, and these men are serving God in a way. They are with a king who is not, of course, converted, but they are serving. And then the king finally, which is very bad, of course, it goes to his head and just makes a decree. Nebuchadnezzar, he wants everyone to worship him. I'm paraphrasing. He builds a golden image. He wants everyone to worship him or pay the penalty. What type of a penalty? You're going to not only die, but you'll be really burned in a very hot furnace. Okay, now how convinced they should be? How convinced would you be if you had to face a challenge like this? Either you change your beliefs or you face a hot furnace. You know, to me, it shows determination. So look at the answer those 3 men gave. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, verse 16. Daniel 3, verse 16. So they told this, it says, "O king," he says, "we don't have to answer you." He said, "See, they don't even want to answer the question, all right? You want to kill us? Go ahead." Look at that faith, that strong determination, the will. He says, we have verse 17. If he says that is the will of God, or the case that God whom we serve, said they will deliver us because they are convinced, God will deliver them. But it's interesting. Even if it doesn't, we still will not change. We still will not do what you say. That's what we're talking about. See, brethren, some of us have not come to that point. Faith is when you know God is going to come to your rescue at all times. But suppose He didn't, then you still stick close to God. You still do what He says. That's what we're talking about. And some of us, maybe most of us, I don't know, haven't reached that point. You know the rest of the story, I don't have to read. I mean, you're facing a situation there's no way out. So the king, as you see, allows them to be thrown into the furnace. You know the story, but you can read it. And later on he comes and says, wait a moment, we threw 3 people in the furnace and there are 4. Christ is there. See, brethren, we read those things, we don't pay attention, we don't believe that those things also are true today. Maybe we don't have the exact examples, but we have so many examples. Yet so many people doubt because of the fact something that they wanted to happen didn't happen. I remember long ago in Belgium, there was a lady very, very much interested in the Bible. He liked us, he liked the sermons, he liked the broadcasts and so forth. He said, Mr. Apartian says, I know you people have the truth, I know you're the church, but, okay, what was that but? He says, the Bible says that you are to preach the gospel around the world. You are not doing it. This was back in 1980, 75, 76. He says, unless you preach the gospel around the world, as a witness, as the Bible says, I cannot be in your church. See, that is what interesting, because if God says that we should do something, we do it, he will give us the means. I said, look, I know we are not doing it. The doors are closed, but in due time, God will open the doors. At that time, I had no idea what internet was. I wished it were. I could have said, here it is, we're doing it. Today, we can't do it, we're doing it. Today, there are no doors closed before us. Back then, there was no doors open. There was no way of entering all these countries in Asia or in Africa, whatever it is. So she did not come with us. She could have. She had a wonderful attitude here otherwise, because of the fact we were not doing what God says in our own eyes. You know, this type of excuses people have today. We're not doing this and that, therefore they won't be part of it. Brethren, you do your share, you do your part, let God change it, let God handle it. That's, to me, it's the most important lessons we can all learn. Let God handle it. If we are not doing something which we are supposed to be doing, God will see to it that we will do it in due time. But you interfere, you start acting your way, or just living and looking elsewhere to find what you're looking for, you're just wavering. And that's, brethren, it's what really hurts. Don't really count on miracles, in the sense that miracles won't really help you. Sure, now you heard about a few people sick in the church. Some of them are healed. Some of them will be healed. Some of them will not be healed. But you see, a miracle is not what you're counting on to just be sure that, okay, this is the church. Okay, my beliefs are right. That's not the way to go. God knows whom to heal and whom not to heal. That's his prerogative. You stick to what you know is right. You pray for the person, and you let God handle it. If in the church of God, again, that's Mr. Meredith will tell you, we used to hear Mr. Armstrong saying, look, if something I'm doing is wrong, please don't be angry with me. Take it to God. If it's wrong, God will take care of me. God will change it. It's not you. Brethren, you turn it against authority, you're in trouble. No matter what your attitude is, you're in the wrong attitude. If there's something to be changed, and I'm sure there are many things to be changed, God will do it through his power. Change in your life whatever you can change in your power. If it's not in your power, let those over you change it. Above all things, let God change it. Then you are on safe ground. Then you won't be wavering. See, brethren, those are the things that some of us have not quite understood. Let's go back to Daniel again. It's an interesting story. To me, it's the story of those three Hebrews is fascinating. Time and again, I go back to it because I have a problem. I don't see the answer. I see, let's say, the end will be. I said, well, I'm sure God will help. But then I said, what? Suppose he doesn't. Am I going to turn my back to God? No. Because as the three Hebrews said, even if God doesn't answer, we still will know and will do what God says. How about Daniel 6? When it comes to actually Daniel himself. See, look at the price. Was Daniel convinced of his religion? Was Daniel religious from the sense of the Bible sense? Yes. Because once again he's facing here another decree. People around him were jealous of his position. They want to find something fault. You know what? They could not find anything wrong, says the Bible, except his religion. You can read. So they could not find, the man is fine, humanly speaking, but they could find something wrong with his religion because that is something the others will agree with him. So what happens? So the king make a decree that unless he actually worshipped, praise to him, to king, that he will be thrown in the lion's den. What's the price? How convinced Daniel should be to just obey or disobey this order here. See, those are extremes, but yet you see the examples in the Bible. None of us, as far as I know, we have had such a challenge to face. What did Daniel do? See if I can just put my finger right on it. He went to his room, and 3 times a day he prayed to God, the windows wide open. Look at the courage. See, that's what we need, brethren. With that type of faith, you won't be sort of shaky. Nothing can really distract you or just turn you away from the truth, because we see those examples before us. We can see that they are true. God is always there to help. But Daniel did not budge. He was thrown in the lion's den. What happened? I guess there's so much here, but I don't want to get into all the details here. But, here, there is, like Daniel, for a king to fast all night is a tremendous sacrifice. He fasted all night because of that. He wanted to save him, King Darius, but he could not find a way of saving him. So, he fasted. That was his way of praying. That was his way of sacrificing. As I said, kings had a bowl every night, if you want to put it that way. So, and then he was still in the back of his mind, he was hoping that God will intervene. And you know what? His prayer, in a way, was blessed, not because God blessed him alone, but you see, in a way, he received a tremendous testimony. And because he's still hoping, as you know, next day he goes and hoping that Daniel is still alive. And says, Daniel, are you there? I'm just paraphrasing. You know the story. Says, yes, I'm here. He says, the God I worship protected me. Just like God protected us through Hebrews. Brethren, those are miracles, true miracles, great miracles. But we don't have to have this type of miracles necessarily to believe. In due time, we might have it. In due time, there will be tremendous miracles in God's church. I'm sure of that. But right now, be happy, be satisfied, be thankful for what you have. And you will not, as I said, you won't have to turn elsewhere to be convinced that you are in the right church. Don't look to criticize others. Ask what you can change yourself. And as you go with this, let's say, conviction, things will happen. Things will happen in your life to just change your own attitude. As I said, miracles alone will not do the trick to convince you. Conviction comes from God, from His Word, from His Spirit. I remember a case, I'm sure Mr. Meredith remembers it too. We had one in the church. He was crippled, paralyzed, and God performed the miracle through Dick Armstrong, his prayer. He was miraculously healed. For some time he was doing fine. Then it went to his head. He began to criticize. He began to think that he was something. He didn't realize he was nothing like every one of us. Then he went back to his paralysis. God showed him, look, he gave him the chance to see, but that type of, let's say, miracle, it does not convince you. What convinces you is to see the true meaning of religion, as we said, as we saw in James. If you have that attitude, you won't boast because God healed you or because you saw a miracle in your life. Let's continue. I was going back to Nebuchadnezzar, but see, he too, when he saw the miracle of these three Hebrews, he says, everyone should pray the God of those three, God of Israel. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, in a way, changed his mind. I don't know the rest of the story, but I think from what I can see, he was convinced. And just remained that way, and God calls him, my servant, Nebuchadnezzar. Interesting, isn't it? All right? How about in the New Testament, those who were convinced? Were the apostles convinced of Christ's teachings? Yes and no. See, they did not have what you have, God's Spirit at the time. So they doubted. They wanted to really do what God says. In fact, when Christ was facing trial, Matthew 25 and so forth, I'm just paraphrasing because it's easier to just explain to you, because you can read later on. Read the way Peter and James, what was their attitude when Christ was being crucified? What was their attitude when Christ said, look, I'm going to die? Oh, no, we won't allow you. We won't let this happen to you. We will be with you. That's in the Bible, you know. Let me just turn to it. See, because of the fact, this is the attitude which is fine unless you can stick to it, unless you have God's power, God's Spirit to keep your word. At the time, these people, the disciples of Christ, did not have God's Spirit in them. They thought they could do it on their own, but they could not do it on their own. It is only God's Spirit will give you that tremendous power or determination to just go on. Yeah. In Matthew 26, you see, when Christ was arrested, they all said, oh no, we won't turn away from you, we'll be with you. And you know what? When the Roman soldiers came, they all fled. Now, there's a difference there between doubting and fear. Humanly speaking, they did not have the power of God, the Spirit of God, to just fight against. You and I, brethren, we have that power. God's Spirit was with them, but not in them at the time. But even then, what happened? Look at the difference. Peter, when he realized what was happening, he wept bitterly. I've said this again, I guess I gave a sermon some time ago, that one sentence to me shows Peter's attitude. It means much more than you and I believe, brethren. The Bible doesn't always explain in detail the feelings, let's say, of anyone's. When God says someone wept bitterly, you know that, well, you can see what Peter went through. He realized, but he was not shaky, as we're talking about shaking here, but it's feared temporarily. And you know what happened? He was blessed later on. God blessed him. He wrote 2 tremendous epistles of Peter, and so much so that we can learn from him. But you see, that repentance was the key, let's say, for him to just understand, wake up. And you know, it came to him. Again, I'm just paraphrasing because of the fact sometimes I cannot see closely here. But when he told Christ he won't deny him, and Christ says, but before the cock or the rooster sings 3 times, you will be denying. And you know what happened? When the rooster did actually crowed 3 times, Christ looked at him. That's what the Bible says again. I wonder what Peter felt at that moment. You know, those are the things we don't need. We don't think about. That shook him. Then after, of course, he went bitterly. It's quite different, of course, as you know, from repentance of Judas. Judas too repented. There were 12 of them. They said, we won't leave you. And Judas was one of them. But Judas repented differently. He hung himself. You know what's one crime, another crime equals no crime in his way of reasoning. Brethren, where are we today? Today, God's church has become diversified, divided. Everyone seems to have his own ideas, thinking this is the right. Yet, it is so simple if we went back to the Bible. And let Bible show us what is true religion. Where is God? What's God doing? The things some of us consider as being important are so little important in God's eyes. You know, for instance, let's go to Luke chapter 17. This too is a secret as to how not to be wavering. Here we have in Luke 16 a very interesting example. It shows, in a way, human weakness, because all of us, especially in this country, we are so blessed. We have so much. I say time and again, every time I had in the past visited poorer countries, I've come back with much more, shall I say, determination, conviction to do the job, because I saw people, what little they had and how much thankful they are, compared to what richer countries like us we have and how little thankful we are. I told you this story, which, you know, there are things in your life you don't forget. You just stick there. And when I, let's say, am a little bit not doubtful, but sort of shall I say, down, let's say, humanly speaking, I remember those experiences. One day, as I mentioned some time ago to you, I came back from Haiti. And they gave me a piece of steak I couldn't even chew. But I know that people who offered that steak to me, they had to work a whole month practically to be able to afford it. And they were so proud they could do that. Then I said, just look at them, I just, tears in my eyes. They said, Mr. Apartian, aren't we blessed? Look at this, aren't we blessed? The blessing is not what they offered to me as meat. You couldn't even chew. The blessing was they were so happy because they could understand the Bible. Because they saw there was a future. They believed in that future. They were waiting for the day when all of us, Americans or Haitians, would be one and prosperous in God's eyes. See, those people were closer to God than some of us are today. And then afterwards, when I returned through Switzerland, you should have seen, I've mentioned this before, but as I said, sometimes they help me to recall those things. I came, it was a tremendous table of abundance. I said, wow. I came from one little tough steak. Here we have everything on the table. And I remember what Haitians said, we are blessed. I said to the Swiss people, you are blessed, aren't you? The answer was, we cannot complain. We can't complain. There we are. That's the attitude. That's that attitude that some of us have, and which will make us be wavering, like the wave of the sea. Luke chapter 17. And that's what we're talking about here, because Christ gives an example here to us so we can see, we can learn from it. Here we have Luke 17, verse 11. Very interesting example. So it happened that Christ went to Jerusalem and he passed through the midst of Galilee. Then he entered a certain village, and then he saw there 10 lepers, The 10 lepers were, of course, wanted one thing. Christ told them, he says, what? What can I do? They said, Master, have mercy on us. That's natural. They are lepers, they are sick, they want to be healed. Have mercy on us. And so Christ told them, don't forget, it's a carnal world. Christ told them to put their faith to test. Go, he says, and go yourselves and to the priest and so forth, go and wash yourself in the, it says go and then you'll be healed. So they were healed. What happened? Now it says only one of them, verse 15, when he saw that he was healed, only one out of 10 returned to God with a loud voice and glorified him. What happened to the others? There is your ungrateful attitude, which will make you wave, which will make you be uncertain of yourselves. So, look at, again, you can see when you read the Bible, you can see the attitudes. Look at the man, the way he came. Only one was healed, returned, verse 15. Returned to him with a loud voice, glorified God. He fell down on his face, at his feet, giving him thanks. You can see the attitude on his knees. Brethren, with this attitude, you cannot be shaky. Do you think you can tell this man, look, it didn't happen? Do you think you can let this man convince that he should be looking for another Messiah? We are getting to the point that some of us will be tested, I'm sure, more than we are today. But let me finish this one here. So Christ, verse 17, he says, when he saw, he said, what? Were there not 10 who were cleansed? Where are the others? It's only found one among these 10 who glorifies God, except the what? The Israelite? No, except the foreigner. Out of this people here, the one who came back to glorify God, to thank God, was not even an Israelite. It shows where we are today. We are so spoiled. God chose the nation of Israel, but we people turned against him. And today, the same thing. Look at where we are today. Among all nations, and it's true, Ephraim and Manasseh, the descendants, are the worst people. We are most blessed, and we are more sins, if you want to put it that way, including homosexuals and so forth, than anywhere else. And this is God's people. Because we have taken things for granted. We haven't really believed God. Well, let's come toward the end of this sermon now. It'll be very simple. God will see to it that Satan will not touch you. Satan will not hurt you. But you have to be sure that you are not going to act like Jonas did. When God called him for a mission, he turned away. Sure, God can bring you back. But be like Paul. To me, examples of Paul is fascinating in many, many ways because Paul, was a man who persecuted Christians. He killed the Christians, so to speak. So here's a man God called to the truth. And you know what? It took the 14 years for the other disciples to accept Paul among themselves. Even his own people will not accept him. They will say, oh no, he's a murderer. Well, how do you think how convinced Paul was? He could have turned away, turned back, go back to his job. He had a good job, honorable position. But Paul didn't. And don't think that Paul was not shaken, that Paul was not tested, that Paul did not suffer. Don't you be fooled. Look, it says in 2 Corinthians, When you read this thing in 2 Corinthians and see what Paul went, how much he suffered, you can't say that, no, he wasn't put to test. Here, of course, he was, in a way, boasting himself. I don't mean boasting, but at least people were trying to just show how much they were different from him. Paul showed that, look, he too was an Israelite. He too suffered. He too was tested. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 22. So he says, look, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they ministers of God or Christ? So am I. So you know what? He's just tested. Here's the man who has done so much. And he still is attacked by others. And then he shows some of the trials he went. How many of us, brethren, would go through any one of those trials and this still not be shaken? Still not say, well, God is not with us, so where is God? I will look for God somewhere else. He says, for instance, I labored more than anyone else did. And as frequently he says, I was thrown in prison. Oftentimes he says, I received 40 stripes, minus one, because that was the end of it. After 40, he was almost dead. He says, 3 times I was beaten, he says, with rods. And I was wrecked. I've been in the deep. He said, I'm just, again, in perils, in waters, in robbers, in the hands of robbers, the Gentiles, all of that. And he says, many weariness, many sleepless nights, hunger, fastings. Look, I mean, it just goes on again. Did he waver? No. He's the man who wrote 14 epistles, and he's the only apostle, believe it or not. He speaks or writes about joy than anyone else. That's right. He spoke more about joy. Look at Philippians. It says, rejoice. I say, again, rejoice. Philippians 4:4. See, can you really go through this thing? It says, rejoice. I say to you again, rejoice. Thank God. He says, he's in Thessalonians, he says, look, pray. Be thankful to God in all things. Look at those statements. That's what we need today in the church. And that's what some of us have sort of lost. That type of eagerness, that type of zeal. It's not late. It's never late. So long as we turn to God. How about Stephen? You want proofs that you have to be strong to stay close to God. God will help you. God helped Paul through all these trials. God helped Stephen. Look, Stephen was a deacon. And Stephen, when God called him, made a tremendous testimony to the people. He told people their sins. He was courageous enough to tell people their sins, even though he knew he was going to be crucified, so to speak, or stoned. Would you have this type of courage to stand up and you know that you'll be killed? Do you think he was convinced? Do you think he doubted about what he believed for? He was willing and ready to give his life, and he gave his life. That's where we have to come, brethren. Believe it or not. It doesn't mean that we have to, but we have to be ready for if is the case. In Acts chapter 7, so here's Stephen. So he told people what their mistakes was, how wrong they were and so forth. Again, I'm paraphrasing. And then when the people heard this thing, they were just very angry at him. Then they stoned Stephen. Verse 19, Acts 7. And they stoned him, and the They tore his clothes and so forth. And then what? He said, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Look at this. Look at the attitude. Brethren, this type of conviction, we need it. We don't have to go through the same sufferings, but those examples are before us so we can know how to be convinced and not be shaken, not be wavering. But you know what? Verse 20 is one verse perhaps we go over. Stephen was able to say that and know that God will listen to, because he says, Lord, do not charge them with this sin. In other words, he forgave. Christ forgave on the cross. Stephen forgave on the cross. If we don't have this forgiving attitude, you won't have, let's say, the blessings you are expecting to have. So, brethren, where are we today? Today we have come to an age where, frankly speaking, I just wonder how long we still have. We waited long ago. We thought the end will come some 20, 30 years ago. It didn't. And we speculated perhaps maybe it will come 10 years later. It didn't. Now you hear us speak about 10, 15, 20 years. We don't know. But one thing is sure, brethren, if we are on strong footing, if we have God, His speech, His teachings, the faith He gives us through His Spirit, nothing can shake us. Unless we have this type of an attitude, I tell you, we will never understand what true religion is. You read it. I showed it to you. So what James says in James chapter 1, James repeat again in chapter 4, and let's close it with it, because James was the brother of Christ. James shows us what faith is, what faith does. James did not claim any, let's say, favors because he was the brother of Christ. But James shows us what true religion is. Let's go back and then how to keep close to God, how to respect God's commandments, how to obey God, but above all things understand what true religion is. And there's only one way you can get it. It's one way you can keep, let's say, that close to God. So James chapter 4. James chapter 4, verse 3. Here we have page 6. James chapter 4, verse 3. Here again, the translations might be different, but the wording is the same, the idea is the same. He says, I'm trying to see, okay. Well, he's actually talking to us. I want to skip that part of it. He comes to verse 5. So do you think that this says the scripture, says in vain? That the Spirit says, if the Spirit dwells in us, and the Spirit dwells in us jealously, that means how much God cares about us. He gives us grace. Therefore, he says, resist the proud. There's the key. That's one way, sure key, you can fight against doubting, against wavering, against, just saying, well, am I really in the right church? Am I really in the right place? Do I really believe what God says? He says, submit yourself to God. Resist the devil, and the devil will flee away. But brethren, this is as good a promise as you can get. There's no doubting. If you believe in this, you're on sure footing. But some of us haven't. They just look around. It says, draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, he says, you sinners. Purify your hearts. You're double-minded. And then look at verse 10. That's where we started, you remember? It says, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. So, brethren, this is true religion. This is true Christianity. This is the true way of being sure that you're on the right footing there. This is what God expects of you. If you have this type of an attitude, you and I, brethren, we will never, never waver like the wave of the sea. Then we can be thankful to God that He loves us, He helps us, and He has promised us to be in His kingdom. And perhaps one word again, just caution. Every time we think about God's kingdom and our role in God's kingdom, I personally, this is personal, a little bit shiver. You know why? Because we think of God's kingdom and we're going to be kings and priests. It's true, but that's not the secret to be really Christian. We're going to be in God's kingdom as kings and priests to serve. That's one condition perhaps sometimes we don't stress enough. Sure, it's nice to be a king. What for? To serve. It's nice to be a priest. Why? What for? To serve. To serve is the key. Christ came to serve. He gave an example to serve. And let's learn that the only way we can be, shall I say, blessed by God and close to Him by this attitude of being humble and willing to serve no matter what, no matter when. This is what true religion is.